Chris Garlock here with Michael Redmond, Nine Don Professional. We're very happy that you all could join us for this latest AlphaGo versus AlphaGo game commentary. We are up to game 37. More on that in just a second. A couple things. US Go Congress coming up later this year in August, usgo.org. Stephen's going to put the actual link up there so you can go. I think it's actually gocongress.org. Sorry, gocongress.org. So you can go right to the Go Congress, see who's coming and all the fun stuff that's going to be there. If you like these commentaries, then the Go Congress is definitely for you. I'll be there. And so will Stephen, actually, and lots of other folks. So check that out and hope to see you there. Also, if you'd like to support this stream, and we hope that you do, Stephen will put up a link where you can contribute, and we appreciate whatever you can help out. It's usgo.org/your donations count, your donations count for those of you watching on YouTube. All right, with that said, let's jump right into game 37. Michael, what is the overview on game 37?
Okay, well, AlphaGo is a bit unhuman in this game, where we're going to see the attacking side suddenly sort of quitting the attack and sacrificing some stones. And the attack sort of just disappears in thin air.
Really? Yeah. Like a magic trick.
Yeah, and the attacking side sacrifices the stones. And the defending side was trying to sacrifice some stones. So it was a kind of a very unusual fight there. It wouldn't happen among human players, I don't think.
Wow, I can't wait to see this. All right, we'll jump into it. Just a reminder to folks, go ahead and jump in with your questions. I'll be monitoring that. And to the extent that we can, we will answer them. Love to engage with you guys. So let us know what you've got in mind. So with that said, Michael, over to you. Let's take a look.
Yeah. Well, I forgot to tell you the endgame gets a bit exciting too.
Oh, there it. All right. Mutual sacrifice, and then we got an interesting endgame. All
right. Okay. 3 points. I guess I'm getting used to it.
Yeah.
And this extension here is a move that has been played by human players. It's a pretty popular move. It's also a point where, for instance, computer programs will be suggesting, for instance, the approach move or a 3 point, stuff like that. Well, basically, with Leela, any 3 points go. So you could dive into the upper left corner too.
Okay.
I think. Well, obviously there's a favorite move, but it's probably pretty small differences if my recollection is correct.
Mm-hmm.
And this is a really big move. So I would sort of, I would have been happy if I was black. I would be thinking of actually playing this Kakari. But white might just ignore it and start playing something on the right side. That's probably the general idea here. The right side is also fairly big. They're probably interchangeable. And in this set of games, AlphaGo is sort of, you might say AlphaGo is allowed to have various strategies. Like it can have similar openings in which it makes different choices, and it's okay. Mm-hmm. Which is not so true of some of the other sets of games, but in this case, AlphaGo does have a variety of moves that it plays. So black jumps into the upper left corner. The final 3 point left open. And when white has already invaded the upper right corner, so just to highlight that, I'm talking about this white group here. When white has already invaded the upper right corner like that, it's pretty common for white to play. In fact, human players and computers will seem to agree pretty much that it's okay for white to play the double hane here. This double hane shape that's happening in the upper left corner, this joseki is usually considered good for black, just because, although it's been a joseki for a long time, the computers give black a slightly better score in most positions. But in this position where white has already invaded the upper right corner, I think the value of that ponuki that black has just been given is relatively small.
Right.
So that would be my interpretation of the fact that this move is more chosen. And so black plays a shoulder hit. So we have the early 3-3s and the shoulder hit. It's the AlphaGo style that people have picked up on. So it's played by computer programs and it's played by humans, this kind of opening.
Mm-hmm.
And this is actually a point where the way people handle it is changing gradually. And I think the same, and since people do so much studying with computer programs, I'd say it's both humans and computer programs who have changed the way they play here. The move that AlphaGo plays in this game is the one that was always played, crawling or pushing, of course. So white could have pushed here also. Let's see if I can. So white could have pushed here. One of these two moves is a move that one of these is being played up to now. Sometimes you see a computer program suggesting sliding like this. This is a bit unusual for a human player. Humans don't really like that as much as pushing once and then sliding, because in this position, white has more control over the corner, while in this position, the corner is still a bit loose. When black plays a move like this, there's still a bit more weakness towards the corner. But the other option that white has, which is played a lot recently, is just to play away. So, for instance, this approach to the Shimari in the lower right corner, or something closer to the black stone on the left. So, if white has more strength, like if black just had the one stone in the lower right corner, maybe white would be playing something like this in an attempt to get a stronger attack against black's shoulder hit instead of just answering it. So this kind of move, and it could lead to this kind of fight. So I'll show you a fight that black would probably, it would be reasonable for black to continue in the lower right corner with something like this. And we would get to this point, after which both players have a lot of choices and it gets pretty complicated. I would want to attach it B for white. But that would get into a very complicated fight. Let's just get into it just a little bit. So like something like this could happen, for instance. This would be one way it could go. Like then white would have a choice of extending down to the second line or crawling on the third line. Something like this. And white's idea would be able to strengthen the group on the lower side. White would probably have to sacrifice 2 stones on the right side.
Mm-hmm.
And eventually would hope to attack black on the left there. A lot of variations, a lot of feasible variations, and some pretty complicated fighting too. So in the game, yes?
Well, part of, for our viewers, part of what's going on here, if you go back to your initial move here, I think a lot of folks are tempted to respond locally, but if I'm understanding correctly, part of the idea about the sequence you were just looking at is both sides are kind of struggling over tempo in the game.
Right, initiative, yeah.
Yeah, the
exactly.
initiative.
Yeah, you've got the right idea. Because black's shoulder hit itself is kind of an attempt to play a kikashi, play a forcing move that will somehow help black towards the center of the board, or maybe to the right half of the board. And so white is trying to force black to take more responsibility for that stone instead of just leaving it as a light kikashi.
Yeah,
so this is this kind of idea.
It's just for us to think about, potentially, can we ignore that, and what you're showing us is some of the possibilities of other options.
And a lot depends on black's position in the lower right corner, obviously. So like if black just has a start point, it might be the mark point. Sometimes you see people playing closer to the black stone with something like this or something like this, which works better if there's maybe a white stone somewhere in the direction of the lower right corner. But of course, just to get rid of all these marks, white 1 in this variation it's kind of a vital point towards it's hitting a weakness of the Shimari, the black's corner enclosure. Because white is eventually planning to do that attachment, just to go forward again. This attachment at 11 is a move that white is sort of aiming at. And this is actually a relatively new move that was played by AlphaGo. And now it's become pretty normal. People used to play somewhere on the third line against this Shumari.
Yeah, yeah.
But it turns out this attachment is fairly effective.
I like that move. It's cool.
But in the game, you might say AlphaGo here played the old style, and black jumped. And now, so we have this big moyo on the right half of the board, basically, for black. And white has some potential on the left side, but mostly white is playing for territory in this game. So you could say white has three corners. The lower left corner is not completely territory yet, but it's probably going to be. It's probably pretty close to being territory. So white has a lead in territory, black has the moyo. It's probably about time for white to do something about that, like just to make another variation here. Locally, wedging here is a very good move, and black will probably cover here. And the next black move will be some kind of a play towards the center. So black has a difficult choice here. It could be something like this, for instance. And in this variation, we see the right side is starting to solidify. It's becoming more and more difficult for white to invade. So while white's wedge there, locally it's a very good move and it's very effective towards the lower side, I would find it a bit worrying. And I would be less sure of myself in invading the right side. And it turns out that AlphaGo didn't choose this move either. So it's probably agreeing with me in that way that it's about time for white to do something about the right side. So back to this position. Sorry, I jumped ahead of it. White jumped in to the right side. This seems very normal. It's a move that I would play. I think Human Pro would play that.
Can you explain to folks what are maybe you could use your cool pointer to sort of look at the various entry points. I mean, I think with a framework that big, you're probably looking at several invasion points, right?
If I'm looking at points, I might want to, maybe I should use the triangle marks.
Yeah, sure.
So this is the obvious invasion. It is a bit deep. A lighter move, you might say, would be this one. With the same idea of white jumping in at this point with the next move. Otherwise, if we look towards the lower right corner, sometimes this is hitting a weak point in the smart. Maybe I should make that a variation. If white plays here, for instance, and like obviously if black answers something in the corner, it's going to be relatively easy for white to live on the side. So if black does not do that and instead plays from the side, white has this move. And this combination here usually works to some extent to erase black's territory in the lower right corner. I'd hesitate to do it in this case because, for instance, if we get into something like this, the right side towards the center of the board is probably just more important in this game. Like white could easily live. It's a pretty big territory, but you can see the center is going to be built up to a big moyo now. So I didn't actually ask Leela about that variation, so I might be wrong, but I would have a tendency to want to play more towards the side. But what actually happened in this game with AlphaGo was very interesting after this. So those are the 3 points that I would say this point would be the obvious invasion. Anything towards the black wall there is probably a bit too close to black's wall. So this kind of move or this kind of move. With that black stone there in the middle of the side, it looks a bit too adventurous. A waiting move actually could be played.
Adventurous is your way of saying dangerous and
Yeah, well, I would be afraid, yeah.
Okay.
Like a waiting move with something like this. This actually is probably an option. In which case, next white would have the option to invade here. It would be a lot safer this time. And so white would still have multiple invading points. And white 1 and 3 in the upper right corner, it is a very big move. So this is probably an option that I would consider at least.
Okay.
But it seems reasonable for white, after black has played this extra move on the lower side, it seems reasonable that white would want to invade. And I would be choosing points towards the right, one of these 3 points towards the right side, rather than a move on the lower side, which is going to be interesting because we're going to see AlphaGo doing something that was not very intuitive.
Intuitive. Right.
So white plays here. Black plays an attachment on top. Like, for instance, if black plays simply like this, white has a lot of options now. White could jump on the side, or white could try to play something towards the center. White's going to have no trouble dealing with this, even if white has to sacrifice this one stone at some point and switch to the lower side or something. The fact that black has played the pillar at 1 makes the whole area relatively small. Black has played a submissive answer there. It makes the whole area relatively small. So when black plays on top, in general, this makes the area on the right side very important, relatively a hot spot. And so naturally, I would say white should find a way to live on the right side. It's relatively easy. So how would you live on the right side? Let's ask you that.
Oh, I knew this was coming. I mean, the thing about it is that I can see a way to live on the right side, but it's going to be a really, really small 2-eye life, and that seems unacceptable, right?
Oh. How would you play to make it as much space as possible?
You could do something like, crawl at R9 and then slide, and that just seems really. I mean, my instinctive move is Q7, the Hane, or Q4, looking to cause some trouble over on the right side. I'm not sure what the follow-up is.
Q4 is a hot move. Yeah, well, I'll take this one. Okay.
Oh, so yeah. Somebody's suggesting the other thing I was thinking about is the wedge. We should take a look at the wedge too.
The wedge, yeah. The wedge is the ladder being bad. It's probably just dangerous. Like if white plays the wedge, black would always have the option of playing this way with the ladder being good.
Right. Yeah.
And then it would be really difficult for me to finish the commentary because it gets really complicated. I'm not sure how this would turn out. Otherwise, wedging is wedging. Let's hear it. Wedging. Even if black plays this way, white would end up having to play something like this anyway. So it's not really. The wedge only functions if there's some threat to cut here or something like that. And it doesn't look like this kind of move is going to work in this case. So if white is just going to be playing this move anyway, it probably makes better sense for white to play the Hane to start with. So I sort of agree with your Hane. And actually, to tell you the truth, I made, in the SGF file, I've made a variation starting with this Hane.
Oh, good. Okay, cool.
Because this seems to be the straightforward way to play. And I'm thinking that attaching the corner is the way for white to go in order to get some space. Like if black plays something strong here in the corner, that means white's going to get the slide here.
Mm-hmm.
So getting the extra getting rid of the cutting point here gives white a bit more space on the side by sliding on the second line. So I'm going to say black is just going to pull back. And we get into this kind of position, which is going to be relatively easy for white to live. Like white even has a reasonable amount of space there. And this is where I stop because even if black continues, it's no problem for white. White could even live easily with this move. But at this point, Leela was telling me that white should, I think it was wanted to cut here or something like that. And so this makes it a bit more messy, and the continuation was getting a bit confusing. So I decided that I would just leave it at this point and say that white can easily live, even if white plays here, or this would be the very easy way to live, which would be reasonable. White has erased the right side, and this looks like it would have been a fairly even result. But let's get back to the game. Sorry. Back to this point, white didn't do that. And there's no way you would guess what white did. Because it's, as I said at first, it's counterintuitive for white to be playing away to the lower side, which is the game variation. It's sort of strange.
That's the move that you were looking at a couple of moves back.
I was looking at it way back when white played the crawling move.
Yeah.
But that was before black had this big moyo. It
Right.
wasn't quite as big at that point.
Right.
On the right side.
Timing
So
seems odd.
if I was playing this game, I would just be focusing on the right side and not thinking so much about the lower side. But let's just to argue for AlphaGo. I'm going to go back into that variation and show you white living on the lower side. And we'll assume white plays the safe move and just lives on the side with this. At some point, black has this forcing move here. Let's just have this variation showing. At some point, black can play here, and the whole lower side is going to become black's territory. And so there is some profit in it for black. Black's cornering closer here. It's being strengthened by all of these moves that white had to play to make a life. So and black does have the outside influence here. So it's okay for black. Black has gotten something out of this attack, although white had no trouble living. Mm-hmm. So I think the idea is that white wanted to play before getting into this variation. Ideally, white would like to play here and force black to play something towards the lower right corner, and then get into a variation, something like this. And then that exchange would be a kikashi. So what I'm saying here is that maybe the idea is that white plays once here, and I'll just make it a variation. Then if black plays here, now white can play here. Now it's less painful to play this forcing move, and then white can just live on the side. So maybe in this case, white might start with the hane here, but something like this anyway. It's relatively good compared to the variation I was showing before. This exchange here on the lower side has given white a little bit of extra profit. So I think that's my interpretation of what AlphaGo is trying to do here. Sorry again. Keep jumping ahead. And this is a position where it's interesting because the answers that AlphaGo is giving sort of resemble what we call kiai in Japan. That's fighting spirit. The Japanese word for fighting spirit. When your opponent is trying to force some kind of sequence of play, and you sort of refuse to go along that road and play a different way. So black is sort of showing fighting spirit by taking the right side, ignoring white's attack on the lower side, and they seem to be both going their own way, independent of each other.
Yeah.
Well, I think when we see AlphaGo doing that, obviously there is a logical reason for each move. It's not as if it's getting upset at its opponent. Mm-hmm. So that would be it's an interesting position, I think, because it resembles what we call fighting spirit, and because it's AlphaGo playing it, I'm sort of forced to think of it in a more logical fashion.
Not that we human Go players ever get upset with our opponents. Certainly not never. Professionals.
Okay, no comment on that one.
Okay.
Okay, so black adds another stone to the corner, and suddenly that huge moyo that black had is being transformed into fairly solid territory. Like the whole right side is going to be relatively difficult for white to jump into now.
So let me just ask here. So this is really, I mean, black is now just, I don't want to say tanuki because I think actually black has responded, but certainly tanukied from the lower side. The lower side, yeah. Mm-hmm. And I actually really like these moves, but I would be afraid to play them and show them to my teacher because I would feel like I would be criticized for lack of fighting spirit. I mean, what do you think?
The fact that white got these two moves in and now it's white's turn means that white will have an advantage in the lower side area, in the fighting here. And what black got out of it is that this exchange is probably a bad exchange. So this is reducing white's potential to play moves like otherwise white would have potential to play moves like this, would have more potential with sort of floating in there. All of that is the value is reduced by this bad exchange. If we assume that, for instance, if we could go back a few moves and have a hypothetical variation where white played here, black played here, white played here, obviously this would be bad for black. But this exchange here would be giving a lot of the advantage back, because it does give black a very solid position on the right side, where otherwise white would be thinking of playing moves like this, playing the more modern shoulder hit maybe. Reducing the right side is just so much more difficult when this exchange is on the board. And so black is getting something out of it. And it's very hard to judge, basically. It's very hard to judge who has made more positional profit here. And this final move that black played also, it's getting rid of white attacks. Probably again, white would be thinking, in this case, maybe the placement on the third line. Let's make a variation. Just like if black played something like this, white would probably have potential to play something like this. Looks like white can get something in the corner with a cutting point here. It looks a bit dangerous for black too. So some ideas like this for white can be used. And so playing at 35 to get rid of that, it's a big move. It's I don't know if I would think of it, but it makes sense when AlphaGo plays it, I might say. Yeah. So, yeah. This move I really like, because you would think that white would play a capping move. And in this case, something like this could happen. Oh, sorry. Something like this could happen. And the latter favors black. Maybe something like this could happen. This would get into a very complicated fight, but white would have to be careful. White has to be careful because the lower side group does not have any eyes as it stands. So if black gets to play first at some point like this, then white could get into trouble here. So this would be a very exciting fight. It's not really clear who's going to win the fight, but just to explain what white's doing here, white is avoiding that weak point, and black doesn't really have time to play downwards. Like, for instance, just to get a few moves further in the game, black moved out into the center. Black doesn't really have time to play on the third line here, because white would play here. And you can see that this white stone, let's mark them with these two stones are creating a very visually nice shape for white. It's a well-connected shape, which would not be possible if white had had the stone one line to the left. It's much better that white has it in the knight's move here. Everything is sort of loosely connected in a very nice shape. And for the final move I've played here is a very effective move in reducing black's central territory, black's potential in the center of the board and the right side, because white is now looking at this hane here to reduce the right side too. And so all of white's stones are working very efficiently here. And I'd say that is because white chose the right point to play with this move. This move is very well placed. It's sort of intuitive for white to want to go one line further, but this is just a much more secure connection. It makes white's following moves more efficient.
It was occurring to me that one of the reasons that it's probably the right move is that if you look at the sequence you were showing for black, it's actually black's move as well, and that's often the answer.
Okay, yeah, obviously, yeah. Black would play there too, yeah. Well, even if black had the move at this position, if it was black's move to play somewhere in the center, well, maybe black would jump a bit further with something like this, but this also would be an option. It's one of the shapes. So in the game, black played this way. So black has to move out to avoid that variation where white gets the peep on the upside. Black moved out. And now white plays here. So white is, you could say white sort of messing with black's shape here. If black had played this one, played this one. If black covers on the third line, it gives black very bad shape there. Like it's an eyeless shape. At any point, white can play the wedge here, and black is just connecting a lot of Dhamma points here. So cutting white off on the side is not very effective for black at this point.
Yeah, there's a question here. I think folks are feeling uncomfortable with the attack on black, and folks are wondering if, maybe black could have left out the P3 and responded, locally there. But well, go ahead. I won't.
Well, I sort of covered that. They're talking about this move. I sort of covered that in this variation where I was talking about. And again, I'm not really. White has a lot of options at this point. White could play. White could have played one line to the left, but White's going to do something like this to scoop out the corner. So that's the idea there. It's just a very the move that Black played here, taking territory. As far as territory is concerned, it's a very big move.
Mm-hmm.
And it is putting some pressure on these white stones by taking away their eye space.
Mm-hmm.
So that does affect the coming fight on the lower side.
Right.
And so black moves out, and white plays this. So this attachment on the third line is taking away black's eye space and threatening to connect up. So it's in that way, it's a very effective move in this fight. And so naturally, black cuts. Well, I think it's natural, and white extends here. So this sort of changes the fight, and we can see that white is completely connected here, and black is not really connected yet on the outside, but black plays away. First of all, there's no way for black to capture this white stone. Black cannot capture it because if black plays here, white can just extend and can connect to one or the other sides. So there's no way for black to capture that stone. Conceivably, black could connect here first, and if white pulled black here, black would have the potential cut here. So there is some potential there, but it's a bit, at this point of the game, it's still a bit far-fetched. It's a bit too far in the future because black's just too weak there. Black's in danger of just being killed immediately and will not really have time to save this stone in the center. Black's just too busy with his other group. So it's not really working yet. This counterattack is not going to work yet, but there is just a little bit of Aji connected there. But for the time being, the important thing is that black cannot capture this stone. Black cannot capture this stone because it's not the ladder favors. Oh, I'm sorry, the ladder favors black. So black can capture it. So black will just
one on the outside. Yeah, I was thinking that it can't
the ladder
capture that.
favors black. And I guess white would just play away. So something like this probably. Maybe this one, yeah. This is always a big move in the upper right corner. So black could have taken the ladder, but did not. And I think the idea is that black is actually trying to sacrifice something on the lower side, just because white has already taken all of the territory on the third line. Like this area is already a white territory. It's pretty easy to overestimate the value of these black stones because they're just sort of resting on top of that white territory. So the fact that white has played these two moves to secure a territory on the third line, while it's really safe for white, it also has the effect of reducing the value of the stones sort of stuck on the outside, because those black stones don't have the value of cutting white up at this point.
Right. So with that, I mean, white, that black group is never going to make territory or attack, is what you're saying.
Right. It's not going to make any territory for black. It's not going to create an attack on white. So it's I think it's in a way it makes sense, although it would be hard to find the idea of playing away at this point. It does make a certain sense to me.
It's funny. So certainly for amateurs, it'd be hard to think of those as kind of a liability, because they're our stones. It's our group.
Yeah. I think actually playing something like finding the ladder is good for black. I would probably just take a ladder. But of course, it's not 100% alive yet, and it's not, when white does something like this later, it's not going to participate in enlarging the moyo either, the right side. it's not participating in that either.
Mm.
So there is a lack of satisfaction in how this is working. Actually, another idea I would have for black, actually, I would definitely in a game, I would probably not come up with the idea of playing away myself. So I would be thinking of playing something local. Maybe I would be thinking of playing a move like this, which makes me eye of the ladder and capturing with a move here. Something like this is what I would be thinking of playing. Admittedly, I think I'm together with the viewers in sort of wanting to play something local.
Mm-hmm.
But the fact that white has connected on the third line, it does make some sense that the whole area has lost some of its value. So it's something that I would have trouble finding, but I find it very interesting, and I can attach some kind of logic to that choice that black made. But of course, white plays here. Now it looks like black's really in trouble, right? Still cannot capture that stone a day.
Oh.
So what is black going to do with these stones? That is the question.
Man.
And black is fighting here. And, you know, that extension on the second line there, in all computer programs, it always happens sometimes. Like, it always happens at some point in the game. And I don't really understand why black plays it here. There are some cases where it would not be big enough. So you could say, give a possible answer would be that black is creating a big co-threat. Or sometimes a black move here will have something to do with a ladder, in which cases black might need this move or a forcing move here to do with a ladder or to do with something on the left side of the board. Sometimes it's necessary to have that, but actually, in almost all of the cases, black can wait to the last moment to play this move. And so it's usually not played. It was never played by humans before. But AlphaGo and Leela, a lot of the computer programs are playing this extension, fairly early stages of the game. So it's something I don't understand. So black plays here. But I do have a game from my past, in which case my opponent, I should go back there, in which case we got into this big fight. In this case, it would be the left half of the board, close to that position in the upper left corner. And when my opponent played that extension on the second line, it was too late. So there are cases where it is not in time. So black has to play it in advance. I could dig up that game and try to find it.
That'd be cool, yeah. Let's look at that.
So black cuts here. Obviously, white is going to save these two stones, right? And black plays an attachment here. So what is going to happen? What is the idea here? White has a choice of simply, my first choice would be to simply connect. Or white can try to squeeze out between these two black stones, maybe. Which would you take? Which choice? We have to remember that this stone here, there's no way for black to capture it.
Mm-hmm.
So these black stones on the lower side, they're cut off.
The viewers want me to Atari, and I have to say that's my first instinct. But of course, that I don't trust that.
You don't trust that.
I don't trust that. Maybe I should. Maybe I should trust my first instinct. I should certainly trust the viewers. If the viewers say somebody wants us to Tanuki, I don't think this is a good time to Tanuki. But
maybe he's been influenced by some computer. Well, he has had contact with computer programs, and computer programs tend to get these crazy points, which are hard to understand for human players.
It just looks like odd shape.
Something like this could happen, and we do see a big moyo, a big territory in the upper right half of the board. And black is going to eventually do something with so like if we just for argument's sake, something like this. Again, I'm
okay.
sort of,
I see where you're going with this. All right.
I'm sort of winging it. I haven't actually made this variation with the computer.
No, but
I think this is the general idea. And again, this is a position that would be very difficult for me to judge who's going to win, because white's getting a lot in the lower left also.
A lot.
Another position which is relatively easy for me to understand would be white connecting here. And so this is the one that I made for the SDF file. And black is actually going to sacrifice these stones. Something like this. And after black sacrifices these stones, the fight in the center is going to continue. So on the whole, black will have potential to attack these white stones, but they definitely do not look like they're going to die, because white does have some potential to counterattack against these black stones. White, for instance, can push here. This would be a forcing move. White can push about 2 times there. So white has some forcing moves there. These black stones on the left, these black stones here, they're not so strong either. They don't have any eyes. And of course, this is a nice little territory white made in this area. It's about 10 points. So naturally, I think this would be my choice if I was playing the game. But obviously that did not happen.
Yeah.
That's what I'm talking about here.
Mm.
So this is a key point in the game, where at this point it looks like white is attacking black. But the person who said that white was going to play away sort of had the right idea. White did not play away, but this is where white just throws away everything. At the very moment where white seems to have this strong attack going, white is actually going to force black to capture that stone a day. And I told you there's no way for black to capture that white stone a day.
You did.
But white manages to make it possible. So white squeezed here, first of all. And this kind of squeeze, it doesn't look like a very good squeeze, because white ends up with cut up shape. Black has the double Atari here. It doesn't really look like it's supposed to work, right? The squeeze itself was nice. It gave black a kind of a dumpling shape, but white is left with a weak shape there.
Multiple cutting points there.
Yeah. Then white is going to throw away the 2 stones also. So black just black plays a double Atari first. White extends this way. And white is, at this point, black does not have time to take the 1 stone. If black takes the 1 stone, let's see, maybe white will just take in a ladder, or maybe white will play here. This would be good enough. White is getting a very good position towards the left side. White is already, at this point, this stone cannot immediately escape. So white has this huge influence towards the left side of the board. And the center is relatively small, because white is extending to a good point here. It's going to interfere with black's attempts to surround the center. So black doesn't actually have time. In a way, this extending here, it sort of came as a surprise too, because when you look at these 2 stones, this stone is the one that can be saved easily just by connecting. This stone, it doesn't look like it. It's hard to see where saving that stone is going to lead. So it's relatively difficult to see white saving that stone. But when white does, it turns out black doesn't really have time to capture on this side. To show you the game variation, black played on this side, white played an Atari. Oh, white did not play the Atari yet, but white connected here. And white is still not connected up to these 2 stones. But as I'm going to show you later, there's no point for black to try to capture them. Actually, trying to going after these 2 stones would be a bad choice for black. So for practical reasons, those stones are connected up pretty much. But isn't this surprising to see white just sort of abandon the attack there? Black already has 2 eyes. Black has an eye capturing these 2 stones, and pretty much has an eye here. It would be very difficult for white to take away that eye. It's alive. Wasn't that too easy for black? This is a very surprising way for white to play, and I cannot imagine a human player playing that way. I would not play it myself. I can't really envision a top pro playing it.
Yeah, I think I see it though because of your explanation from earlier, because in this variation, I mean, yeah, black lives, but black just lives with a couple of eyes, and white has now, actually one of the viewers is just pointing that out, that that white's wall is now reducing the right side. That seems like it's a
That's
that's
the biggest profit that white gets.
yeah.
White is looking at a potential move at the mark point here on the right, which will reduce the right side. So white has some potential there with either this hane, or white could start with an attachment against the corner. So there's, because of this big wall that white just made right here, all this line of stones does have make a difference to black's territory on the left, on the right, sorry.
Mm-hmm.
There's also the fact that that's the right side. Even on the left side, the fact that white hasn't played this Atari yet, but basically white has a forcing move here. These three stones, although they're sort of clinging to a strong position of black's, they do make a difference to what's going to happen on the left half of the board. So it's as if white is starting to build some potential. It's not a territory yet. White's building some potential towards the left side too. So strangely enough, it's working.
Yeah.
And black switches to the left side and pushes here. A very difficult position on the left side of the board too. It's hard to see how much influence these three stones that white has towards the center, how much influence they're going to have on what happens here. For instance, if white plays strongly here, it would be the hane on top of black stones. This is the move that I would have expected. And black will play a hane here and then hane here. White has an issue with this cut here. White has to be careful. If white cuts here, black will cut and connect on the second line. And there's all these threats. I've listed 3 threats that black has against white. Black has the cut at A, which will be, actually that will be a ko in the corner. Well, black has the connection at C, which is threatening these 2 white stones at the same time as threatening to break into the side. And of course, if black plays at B, black's going to be able to connect on the side. So for instance, just for the viewers here, to say if white connects here, then black can cut here. And the ko I was talking about is white covers on the second line and plays a hane. When white curls around here, there's no way for black to fill dames from the right side. Like if black plays here, it's just pointless. But black can actually win the semi with this move. It might not be the best of ideas because white's going to get another forcing move, some more forcing moves on the outside.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure this is the way black should do it. Otherwise, black could make a ko, or black could just leave it at that point. After playing this far, black could switch to the side to connect up to. This is probably the best choice, to connect up to this stone. If white connects, then it's bad for white. Black can capture the one stone here. So if white backs off, then black can connect up the side. And the corner, if white plays here first, white's going to win the semi in the corner. But you can see that black has succeeded fairly well in reducing the left side in this variation. Mm-hmm. So something like this. White has a lot of problems there to contend with when white plays this hane on the top. The force sequence, I think, up to this point. At this point, white suddenly has a lot of threats to deal with, and it makes it very difficult for white. Like for instance, just to get into another variation, if white played here, it might be difficult for black to save those 4 stones, but black could start. Let's see, where shall we start? Black could just well, first of all, this would be a real ko now. White, like if black played this way, it would be a ko in the corner. So this is one thing that could happen. That was the ko I was talking about. Otherwise, black could just break through the side. At this point, if white fills the liberty there with white 9, black could just break into the side, which would also be, probably it would be passable. Black could continue with something on the left side. So black has a number of choices there. So white did not do that. To get back to the game, it's really hard in this fight on the left to see who is attacking, because it looks like white is playing a sabaki move here. White is trying to make shape. So white didn't really have as much potential to attack as I originally thought. And white is just switching to the side, allowing black to connect up. And it turns out white is going to get some territory on the left half of the board, just playing like this. Black's knight's move here. This move was setting up a black kosumi at B, the diagonal move at B, which is going to put pressure on white in the center, and also threatening to cut at A. So white naturally answers on this, gets rid of the cut on the fourth line. This cut here gets rid of that. White has made some territory on the side. Black's group here on the left, it's pretty much alive. This group here, if black plays at this point, black's going to be able to make two eyes. Otherwise, black can connect up to the center of the board. So it's settled down. And now the question, the only question left is what's going to happen in the center of the board. Black,
just a quick status check, and folks are wondering what's the balance of territory at the moment.
Well, white has let's see, white has close to 50 points, and in this position, it's just a little bit too early to count the right side. So there's not very much black territory to count. So in this actually, I'm going to take the game a few moves ahead to this point. And this is where black starts to have a choice. So it looks like black can capture those 4 stones in the center. So what do you think about that?
I tell you, the flow in this game is the whole flow is very counterintuitive to me. It's very flexible.
So where would you play black's next move?
After the Atari.
Yeah, this black stone is an Atari.
Well, I sure would like to connect it.
Connect.
But I'm trying to think of why that is.
Might be a bit hard to see why it's bad, right? Yeah, the flow of this commentary probably indicates to you that it's not so good.
I am picking up the cues here. I have a suggestion from one of my online friends here. Let me just take a look and see. It goes N10. Where's N10?
N10 is pulling back here, and white lands.
Yeah, that doesn't. Yeah, I don't know that I like that.
You don't like that?
Probably right, but well, I guess that is consistent for the top right. Okay, that
top right. Black would actually, in this case, the line here between this wall and these 2 stones, black would probably need one more stone to make it complete. So I would say black would probably follow up with this move. This is actually pretty close to the right idea. I think the problem with using 2 moves in that direction would be that white gets to play on this side now.
Is there a way to do it in one move? That's the thought.
And just leaving it at 1 move, and for instance, playing on this side, black 1 is not really interfering well enough when white does something like this. White has some pretty good potential to be jumping into the black territory.
Yeah.
So actually, that idea of extending here, let's show you the bad variation now. Connecting actually is the mistake that I had ready. Capturing these 4 stones.
It was a trap.
It's a trap, you might say. It would be the losing move. Like black gets something close to 20 points there, but it's just bad. It's like white is already getting something back on the left side now.
Oh, that's awful.
And the whole right area is so much smaller. Like there's all these weak points. There's this move. White might start with attachment against the corner. White can at any point jump in here. Black has lost a lot of territory. So this is the bad example. And the move that was suggested, this one is basically it's the right idea. I'll give you one last chance to try to improve on that. But we're so close to the correct answer.
Yeah, I'm looking at trying to be clever with trying to see if something like, M12 or I mean what I'm looking at is N11, another one of these weird Kasumis.
Right. Yeah. Well, flexible is the word. You had the right idea there. This is the game move. So very good. You got it. Yeah. Now, just the difference there is that in this position, this point is not open for white to play. White does not have the option of going that far in. And that's the comparison with this variation, where white did have that that opening there to jump in there. I could just add some more moves there. Like if black plays here, white actually has a number of ways to. White might just squeeze. It looks like it's going to be okay for white. There's this. There's some trouble with these black stones. They're
terrible shape.
Yeah. It is a very
classic dumpling shape, isn't it?
It's a dumpling shape. It was a complicated variation, but something along those lines would looks like it would work. But when black plays this way and then plays this move, these two moves here, this move and this move, combine to suddenly sort of finish off the right side. It's already looking like a black territory.
All right, we now know the name for this game. This is the game of the Kasumis. This is the third weird black Kasumi.
Okay. So this again was this move also was a very effective move that just closes off the territory here. It's going to have some effect on consolidating that line also. So it's a very effective move that finishes off the black territory. And at this point,
folks were just asking about that. You just explain why that move does that. I think people might be inclined, if they want to close off that territory, to play something like, I don't know,
the knight's move.
Yeah, the knight's move. Yeah, the knight's move.
Yeah. Well, the fact is that there's just a little bit of potential for white to play some kind of a endgame sequence towards that line there. It's not as if white's going to break into the territory, although you never know with AlphaGo. But for instance, moves like this or moves like this are going to be just that much more difficult to contend with. Like this looks like it might be the way to go for white. And there's going to be a weak point here, which is going to change how the endgame moves are played in the center of the board. And so it's sort of subtle, but there is a weakness there, which in the game position, when black plays here, and later on white plays here, sorry, not that one. And when white plays here later, black's going to be able to counter it with pushing here. And this black stone is making the cut on the fourth line. It's taking away the cut on the fourth line. So you can see how the diagonal move here is more effective towards the center of the board.
Right.
And the line surrounding black's right side, it's pretty much the same line anyway. Like it's gonna be maybe black stones on these 2 points. And I'm really messing it up with the pen here. So maybe a slight difference in the right side territory, but the difference in the center there is more important. So white plays here. This is just interchanging with the black move to connect to the center of the board. And black's perfectly alive there. So white plays towards the center. It sort of looks like we're entering an endgame.
It does.
But I would say that in most 2-in games, these two black moves, this 105, the diagonal move here and the diagonal move here, these two moves would be called the decisive moves, and black would just win the game because if we're assuming a borderline, something like this seems reasonable, right?
Yeah.
For black's territory to shape up in. This is just too much territory.
It's what, a third of the board, something like that, yeah?
It's something like 65 points. It's enough territory for black to win the game.
Absolutely. Which is
it
must not be black's territory then.
Well, so the end game that involves that territory is going to get really complicated. Very hard for me to understand as I was studying the game. And so I'm going to give you some long sequences. So white starts with the honey.
Like sequences.
You would think that the black territory is finished, but no. So far,
I've been doing these games with you too long, Michael. It's never done with AlphaGo.
Okay, so white plays the clamp here. Looks like it doesn't work. This is a point where if white had just played a mundane endgame sequence with moves like this,
honey,
black would extend. White's going to lose by a couple of points. It's not going to be a huge difference. It's probably going to be something like 8, maybe less than 10 points before Komi. Obviously, when black extends down here, black's territory on the side there has increased a little bit. But now white peeps here. Black, as I told you, this move is helping black to push here. It makes it easy. Looks like nothing's happening, right?
It does look like nothing's happening.
White cuts. Black can handle that. And now we have this move. Jumping a bit too far inside, right?
This looks like the kind of stuff I do when I'm looking for a place to resign.
Not quite. Not quite for AlphaGo. So, obvious question is, what happens if black plays here? Answering that question was not so easy, because a lot of the variations are going to be very close anyway. And so I had a lot of trouble finding something that I was satisfied with. I was using Leela to help me. But in a position like this, Leela can be very ambiguous. I think it's correct for white to play the attachment here. And the point of this move is that we're sort of heading into a big ko on the center of the board. And so after this, I'm going to show you how the ko happens. White doesn't have enough ko threats. White has a ko threat here, and it's going to have another ko threat after black takes here. So white has 2 ko threats on the right side. Black has some ko threats here. It's going to be more than 2 ko threats, curling around there. So white needs some extra ko threats, and I think now is the time for white to start making them. It all depends on how big this ko threat in the lower right corner is. Like white could play for and it's a forcing move. For the time being, white's just going to get a small life in the corner. If white starts the ko first, it's not going to be big enough. So white plays this now, maybe once more. So whether white has to play the hane first or not, very hard to judge, because either way it's going to be a close game. But the point is that white is going to continue with this sequence in the center of the board, threatening a double Atari. Black has to answer here. So white plays here. Black will answer with this Tesuji. White captures. Now white throws in here. And we see the ko. Okay, so white has 2 ko threats at A. Those 2 ko threats are going to be big enough because they saved the white stones inside black's territory. Black has ko threats at B that are going to be big enough. Black has at least 3 ko threats there. So white needed the ko threat at C. Black is going to take first, so white actually needs, if black has 3 ko threats in the upper left, white needs a total of 4 ko threats. This is where I stopped in the variation. If black takes here, for instance, let's continue a bit for the viewers here. So just to simplify things, I'm going to start with these ko threats. White might actually start with the lower right corner, but white has these 2 ko threats. Black has no good local move here, so black's going to play a ko threat too. White has a close threat here also, which again, white might save these for later, but just to simplify things, I'm going to do it this way. And now, if white had not played that exchange in the lower right corner, this set of 2 moves each, if white had not played that, white would not have a valid co-threat. And the loss in the center of the board would be too big to make up for anything white did in the lower right now. But because white has played that exchange, it makes it just that much bigger. So white has this co-threat here. And we'll continue with, for instance, something like this, living in the corner with Sente. And another close game. I think this would be pretty close itself, because black has profited a lot in the center of the board. But living in the corner with a tempo, with Sente, and you can see that white has gotten some extra profit. These 2 black co-threats have lost some points. They've lost the endgame sequence starting with this black move. All of this adds up to another close game, which is difficult for me to judge. So all of that is starting from this move. But I had to figure it out. That's my best explanation, this variation here, where white gets this ko in the center of the board.
So what's so interesting about this is that you had showed us, the nice Kasumi at, P7 being such a nice solid move, and because it simplifies things and is so strong, but it's still, even so, there was still the
even so, white found.
Yeah. Still, yeah.
Like this is in a human game, in a game of mine. At this point in the game, we would be running low on time. I think it would be pretty close to impossible to calculate this whole sequence. It took me a long time to figure it out.
Wow.
And so I'm sort of trying to say that I think that at this point, the game, it would have been fairly likely for the game to just proceed in the more mundane end game that I was showing you here, where black is going to win by a few points. Mm-hmm. That would be the reasonable decision made by most human players, I think. Mm-hmm. But AlphaGo comes up with this move, and we see that black is backing off a little bit. So white got some extra profit here. And this makes it a very close game.
Well, look,
yes.
No, I'm just asking if you. I'm just wondering, what if black instead of N2 protects against all of that? I mean, assuming that white.
N2 was a very big move.
It's very big, but I mean, is it bigger than this mess in the? I mean.
Okay. Well, this is just
preventing the ko. It's got to be worth something.
It's bigger because in the game, black is just backing up a few points. It's probably less than 5 points that black is giving away in the center of the board. Black did get something on the extra on the side, very slightly. That's sort of hard to say because white is going to get some profit out of, because of the cutting point here. White is going to get something extra with this scrolling move here. But black did gain a few points when white played the clamp here. Black did gain a few points there. And this move is so huge that it's worth giving up a little bit in the center of the board.
Okay. All right.
So black extends. And now we're actually entering an endgame. But again, we're going to see something pretty amazing happening in the corner there. It'll take a bit.
Oh.
So far, it looks very reasonable. So far, it looks reasonable. It looks like a very normal end game. And looks reasonable moves.
Yeah.
Okay, white plays an Atari here. And what's happening with this Atari is sort of hard to say. But black, there was some bad oddsy there on the side. Black answers on the side. This seems reasonable, just because of the various cutting points that I had to deal with. But now white is going to show us an amazing endgame move here. And surprisingly enough, this is much more effective. The move that I think that people would be playing without thinking would be just sliding here locally. This looks just a little bit better. But it turns out that this is a very unusual shape that is effective in this case alone, because if black plays away, in the game black answered. If black plays away, white's going to push through here and capture the 2 stones, because if black saves the 2 stones, there's this thing, and there's this ko here. And so obviously for the same reason, black cannot answer on this side. It would be the same problem. Same problem. Black has no pushing move. This is a snapback shape. It's going to be a ko. So this is a very effective move, which is not, it's not an endgame shape that we sort of know hardwired. Like professional players, when you're close to the side of the board, you just know the correct shapes. In almost all of the positions, the correct move is automatic. But in this position, the automatic move would be this one. It's not correct. The game move is better. And this is really interesting because just because the computer programs don't have the same experience that human players have, they're able to find better moves in positions like this. And I think when we're on the first line or second line, close to the side of the board in an endgame position, it's a very unusual thing. But it's so it's sort of rewarding for me to be able to see that.
Very, very cool.
And then white can extend here. And now black has to deal with this connection. There's still the cut here, a threatened ko. So again, this was actually it was a pretty amazing endgame sequence, although it was a bit subtle. White gained a couple of points there. And so now we're into the endgame.
Wow.
And actually there is one final point, which is sort of interesting. You know that AlphaGo uses a rule system that can be compared to, it can be said that it's the same as the Chinese rules. It counts 7.5 points komi, and it counts the stones. So it's very similar to the Chinese rules. You could say it's the same rule set as the Chinese rules, and that would be as correct as I can be. And that actually changed how the game was finished, because there's this point in the game where there's what we would call a 1-point move left. So I'll just take you to that point. There's this. Okay, they've started to play the final calls already. So white connects here. This move is actually just the final ko. This ko here, if black takes here, white can take here. So this shape in the center is just a double ko shape. For all effects, it's already finished. There's no problem. Even if black takes at the 1 point, white can take at the other point. So white is going to connect one of those kos, black is going to connect the other.
There's 3 kos though.
So there's all these kos in the center of the board. There's also this endgame move, which is another ko. White cannot connect yet. White has to connect here. So that's another ko. People would call this a half-point ko, because it takes 2 moves to get the 1 point. That's why people used to call it a half-point ko.
Okay.
In any case, it's less than 1 point. So obviously, playing a 1-point move would be better than connecting one of these kos. That is, if you're using the Japanese rules. So, so what I'm saying here is that white connected here, black connected here. Sorry. Black, yeah, that was another ko there. And white takes the ko, black plays here. They're ignoring a 1-point move. Do you see the 1-point move, Chris?
Oh, yeah. A6.
That was another of the kos. This is the move white just played. This is another ko. It's another fraction of a point. There's a 1-point move in the center of the board.
1-point move in the center.
It's N10. Yeah,
right,
you found it. This one.
Yeah.
So white could just play here. It's a 1-point move.
Yeah,
if we were playing by the Japanese rules, this would be the better move.
Absolutely.
And white would make a point here. The players would fill the kos. Black would win that ko.
Okay.
Black can fill the Dhamma while winning this ko. And that's a point where something that happens in China a lot. If you can fill the Dhamma points while winning the ko, then you're going to get an extra 2 points.
Mm-hmm.
So, for instance, white might play something like this. Black would just fill a Dhamma point. Black would just continue filling the Dhamma points. And black has all these ko threats, like black has a ko threat here. It's conceivable that black can win the ko. There's not so many Dhamma points left. So this is not really my area of expertise because I haven't actually played very many games actually counting with Chinese rules by myself. But with a cut there and there's a cut here in white's territory, as the Dhamma fill, there's going to be a cut here later on. So it looks like black can win the ko. All of white's ko threats are involved with the cut here, so they're going to run out. And in that case, if black could fill all the Dhamma points and then win the ko, it would be a big difference in the score. So it's actually more profitable for white to be fighting the kos and allowing black to play that move in the center of the board. It's a really weird position.
It's completely bizarre.
Just starting with the idea of Japanese rules, it's a weird position. But it's something that happens in China a lot. When one side has a lot of ko threats, sometimes it's more profitable to fill the Dhamma points as the ko is being played. And you can see now we've a position with 2 kos, so there's no problem for white. When black takes the 1 ko, white can just take the other ko. Again, with the Chinese rules, if one side has more than enough ko threats, actually black is actually fighting that ko. But at this point, for instance, if black had, this is where actually looks like white resigned. Actually, white won by 1/2 point. White won by a quarter of a stone.
Good Lord.
But like if black had filled the Dhamma here and white had connected here, then that would be very dangerous for white because black would start filling Dhamma points and would be able to win the ko and gain a stone or 2 points in the Japanese counting.
Which would be enough.
Which would be enough. Whereas by leaving the 2 ko threat, the 2 ko's there, like every time black takes one, white can take the other. There's no way for black to fight a ko here. So if black connects, white connects. So white is basically waiting for black to connect the ko so that white can connect the ko.
Jesus.
And so this is a tactic at the final stage of the game, which is very effective when you're using the Chinese counting method. It's something that if you do play games like with the Ing rules or Chinese counting rules, you sort of have to know this if you're going to win the half point games.
Wow. My buddy Steve Colburn, he loves counting Chinese, and in fact, I don't know if he still does, but up in Rochester, but he used to run a tournament where they use Chinese counting. Not so popular in the States, partly related to the reasons that you're talking about. For those of us brought up on Japanese counting, it is extraordinarily discombobulating to see all of the stones just go flying.
Yeah, well, when you're not used to it, it's disturbing. It's basically getting the same result. It's very clear that the result is different, and logically it makes sense. Actually, I find it very convenient. I actually count with Chinese rules when I'm setting games and I come to an ending position. I want to check the score. And like if I'm studying by myself, maybe I haven't taken care of the captured stones very well. So I don't know who has the right number of captures and stuff like that.
Right.
When you've lost the captured stones, sometimes it's really good to be able to count with Chinese rules.
That's the first thing. So when you do Chinese, is that people, they just toss the captures into the bowl and
they throw them back to you.
I know the expression on people's faces. You'd say these are my captures, and now we don't care about them.
That happened to me with Gu Li. You remember Gu Li, the top Chinese player?
Yeah.
I played a game with him in some tournament, and he just took a stone of mine and he threw it back into my bowl, like a basketball player. Went right into the hoop, and I was surprised. And then he realized that I wasn't used to it,
Uh-huh.
And so after that, every time he took a stone of mine, he would very carefully put it on the counter next to the go board, like he didn't know what to do with the stones that he captured.
Different kinds of things. All right. Before we wrap up, let's take a couple of questions. Somebody earlier, well, I'll just answer, let's ask one of these ones that started right now. Speaking of counting, which is great explanation, by the way, I think I understood most of it. They're curious about what your take is on how to teach beginners counting. That's a tough question. I don't know if you have a simple answer to that.
Um, well, I think that people who like to teach beginners should try to be very flexible.
Mm,
And I find that actually the teacher having a system is not always working because students have various ways of understanding. And
sure.
some people will just immediately latch onto the idea and have no trouble.
Hmm.
Some people have a lot of trouble understanding what's going on. So um, actually counting the game is not that important for
Hmm.
real beginners. So you just have to help them at first. I find it easier to teach with the Japanese rules,
Hmm.
but that's because I'm so much more familiar with the Japanese rules. And so I can explain them in a more understandable manner.
I,
Um,
I, I think too that one of the things I've always loved about the Japanese rules for years is that there's a very sort of logical aesthetic to it because you played this game and then once it's all filled in on the board you can really see where the territories are. It's
right.
very obvious. Whereas even though I know that technically the Chinese system is a better counting thing, it's very messy. The stones are flying and there's piles of stones and I think
Well,
aesthetically, I think it's difficult. I think particularly for beginners, it could be very confusing
I
personally.
think it can be easier to understand the open spaces as territories. Of course, the logic behind the Chinese system could be that you could say that those are areas where you're allowed to place your stones.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's a logic to that also. I think logically both arguments sort of work.
Hmm.
But I think it is sometimes easier for beginners to understand open spaces as areas that you've surrounded as your
Hmm.
territory. So the whole idea there is it's a lot easier for most people to
Hmm.
to um, to connect up to.
So,
Like I was saying, even in the teaching how to play itself, um, some people do better if you give them example games to copy as they start playing.
hmm.
And some people just feel happier starting with an empty board. Um, there's various ways you can do it. With children, I find it's usually better not to explain very much.
I
Just
was
let
gonna,
them play.
yeah, I think that's a really important point. I've actually seen folks both with children and with adults, sort of launch into all the different rules and then try to explain and you can just sort of see people losing interest and it seems like getting
Yeah.
them playing even if they don't do exactly right seems like a good way to go, right?
Yeah, well, that was the idea behind the capture game.
First capture, yeah.
The first capture, you win the game. That's a really great way to start people up on the game. And then there's an argument as to maybe it's slowing their progress into the real game of Go.
Hmm.
It's hard to say. I think it differs with every student.
Yeah, I think that's right. One other question, and I think this is a fairly simple question. Somebody was wondering about when you were first looking at the AlphaGo, this particular series, I think, the eight AlphaGo versus AlphaGo, looking to understand them. Was there anything in particular that you were looking at, when you start to analyze them? And I think in some ways it's a little complicated because they're such complex games. But was there any particular thing that you had in mind as you approached them?
Well, I think at first I was just so astounded by uh, all of these 3-3 invasions.
Hmm.
So I was still trying to sort of get an idea of what was going on with the early 3-3 invasions and the shoulder hits. Um, And so I was focusing on the opening more. I think now I'm finding a lot in the middle game and towards the end game also, as you saw in this game itself. There's a lot of just the calculating power is still so much more than what we have when we're just using a PC at home. Even though we have a very powerful program and programs like Leela or Cartago, for instance, basically they're probably the same thing as AlphaGo. Although I'm not a computer engineer, I don't really know. But even with that, I get the feeling that, for instance, with this endgame sequence that I had so much trouble making, and I only have my own opinion that it's probably correct. The fact that AlphaGo is calculating that indicates that its calculation there is so much more deep and probably precise than what I'm getting with a computer at home, with what should be a fairly similar program. I'm just really astounded by the calculating power that they have and the results that it's showing in the middle game and towards the end game.
Right. Well, I mean, and especially thanks for, as usual, for taking the time to work out. I know for folks, especially like the end game or working out, this. I saw some comments. It's a few points here and a few points there, but it really, even for those of us trying in our own way to figure this stuff out, it's really helpful, and I think we all appreciate all the time that you spent, investing.
Oh, that's what I do.
I know.
In this game especially, it would have been really easy for White to lose by something like 10 points before Kona.
Right.
Yeah. So it was an amazing endgame to me.
It really was, and everybody knows Michael loves Endgame. All right, that's going to do it for us today. Again, check out gocongress.org, see what's coming up with the U.S. Go Congress. We will be back next week, either with another AlphaGo game or maybe with a Redmond game, with one of his tournament games. Before I go, if I'm not mistaken, I believe our wonderful, I should say our lovely producer, I believe he has a birthday, if I'm not mistaken. So happy birthday to Stephen, and thanks for all of the work that he does and the rest of our team as well. And as always, thanks to our AGA members. Stephen put up some information there about we'd love to have you join the AGA if you're not a member. If you are a member, thank you for that. And as always, thank you, Michael Redmond, and we will see you next week.